On the 18th of June, in the afternoon, just a little after 3 o'clock, the police department received a call of a missing child. We take these things tremendously serious. Unfortunately, we have in the past, in the city of Salt Lake and throughout our nation, had far too many missing children that have ended in tragedy. And so it's circumstances where we send a number of resources to the scene in order to ensure the fastest possible conclusion to one of those events. We had numerous officers in the area. Officers conducted a search of the house, not an extensive search by any means. In fact, I'm sure the parents have conducted a search. Ultimately, the child was found about an hour and a half later, underneath a box, buried with blankets, asleep. We had circumstances where this particular child was non-responsive to verbal indication. So calling his name would not have solved the situation for us. Our officers immediately began conducting a search of the area. As I said before, we have had extensive and unfortunate practice in this particular area. We follow protocols outlined by the National Center for Missing and Exploited and Missing Children. We've worked with them extensively in the past, not only here in Salt Lake, but as we've partnered with other agencies as they've had tragedies of missing children and children, unfortunately, ultimately found murdered. One of our officers responded to the residence of Mr. Kendall, knocked on the door, and received no answer. There was a yard to that location. The officer entered the yard. It was an unlocked yard. He did not force his way into the area. At some point, the officer encountered a dog that he felt was a threat. My expectation of every police officer, in fact, I verbalize this to every single officer who sits in my office. I ask you to do what you believe is right, given the circumstances that face you. Now, doing what's right, given the circumstances that faces anyone, does not always result in the best outcome of a situation. But we can't ask much more of a police officer, especially given the dynamic situations that occur every single day in this city. Unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, the officer utilized a firearm to stop the dog that he believed to be attacking him. There's been a lot of information put forward about where the dog was and the distances and some of those other things. It would be irresponsible of me to go into tremendous detail there because we still have an investigative process to take place, which involves our Internal Affairs Office. It involves the Civilian Review Board, an independent investigation of the circumstances. For me to come to too many conclusions today would usurp that process and in fact nullify it. And I'm not only not going to do that, but I'm absolutely unwilling to do that because that process is extremely valuable to how we do business. And we support it 100%. But in this particular circumstance, evidence shows that the dog was extremely close. In fact, within feet of the officer. We do have documentation that, of course, will be part of the investigation and determinations can be made there. This is an unfortunate circumstance where a family pet, where Geist was killed. It's not the intention of any police officer to go out and conduct business in this manner. They're put in a situation that they have to face some tremendous circumstances. And if you think for just a minute, imagine what the outcry would be if we said, well, we didn't go into any yards looking for this child. If something tragic happened to the child, we didn't go into any yards that were fenced. We didn't look anywhere where we didn't think we had access to. Exigent circumstances certainly dictate our ability to go in an unsecure yard and to check and see if a child is in there. In fact, it wasn't too long ago in a neighboring area that a child was thrown over the neighborhood fence after horrendous things were done to him. It is our responsibility to ensure that we do all we can to bring safe resolution to the circumstances that we encounter. As I said before, unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, a family pet lost its life. Not the officer's intent. In fact, the raging debate has gone on the internet and throughout as to who the officer is and which Officer Olsen. Well, it's Officer Brett Olsen. And yes, he is the hero of Trolley Square, or one of them. This is a seasoned officer who has tremendous experience and in fact has been under fire and performed very well. I'd like to take just a moment to read a few of the emails. That officer would lay dead next to my dog. I can honestly tell you that if a cop were just to shoot my dog, I would find a way to shoot that cop. No joke, I would kill the cop that killed my dog. That pig that shot the dog needs to be executed too. There's a lot worse than that. It is extremely disappointing. This police department has worked tirelessly to ensure that the process that exists within our city for people to protest, for people to bring forth issues, for people to address problems and concerns with the police department, that avenues exist that we can move together and resolve problems. The other thing that is amazing to me, after 23 years in law enforcement, I haven't seen this type of public outcry when certain human beings have lost their lives. And this doesn't, I'm not here to minimize any particular incident, especially not this one. But perspective has been lost. Absolutely, the police department is going to go forward with an investigation. Individuals will be held accountable for their actions as they always are. Not held accountable to this ridiculousness. So that there is no confusion, the process by which an officer is investigated and reviewed by not only Internal Affairs but the Civilian Review Board takes approximately a month. Officers are afforded the right to have attorneys present when they're brought into that, or representatives of their choosing. There's time frames as outlined in our Memorandum of Understanding with officers and our labor union. The Civilian Review Board has to impanel a group in order to hear the circumstances. It is a process that takes place. That does not mean that we're minimizing, that we're not moving forward. Right? But it is a process that takes place, and it is a good and thorough process that takes place. In fact, it is the exact same process that has reviewed officer-involved shootings, has involved officer use of force, and all kinds of other officer misconduct that has come forward. We are committed, as we have been in the past and will continue to be in the future, to ensuring that the Salt Lake City Police Department does business appropriately in line with the community expectations that exist. I should add realistic expectations that exist. We have contacted the Humane Society for the United States and the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary and the Department of Justice. We will be reviewing not only the officers' actions, we will be reviewing our training and protocol and how we approach situations. I cannot in my mind, however, at this point, imagine an officer coming forward and saying that we didn't do all we could to find a missing child. I ask only one thing, and that this community continues to approach interactions with the police department in a respectful manner. I absolutely demand that every single one of my officers treats the public with the respect and dignity that they deserve. My officer and officers deserve no less. With that, I will take a couple questions. Understand that I will not go into great detail because, again, I think that's a responsibility of the Civilian Review Board. So you know I am obligated to take into account the investigation of Internal Affairs, the review of the Civilian Review Board, before making my final conclusion. And I will not make a final determination until I have both those done. Please.
This really seems like an issue that's got fired up. You're really angry about this. backlash from the public. Is that fair to say?
I think it's better to categorize it as disappointing. Because, as I said before, circumstances, significant, impactful circumstances in our community have been dealt with by this police department in a very humane and civil manner in the past, and will continue to be. And that expectation, and as I've always said, I received tremendous accolades for how Occupy was handled in the DeChristopher incident. In fact, we won't name the source here and single anyone out, but I was picked as the Utah of the Year. That's not me. That's because we have officers in this department who put forth the exact ideal that I asked, to treat people with dignity and respect. And that is a two-way street. Occupy and resolution of those events, the DeChristopher event, time and time again, events that have taken place, going back to early in my career as the police chief, the Destiny Norton incident. These types of resolutions do not take place unless it's a two-way street. It is dependent upon the public and the protesters to work both ways, because if one of those sides elevates the circumstance, whether that's the police or the public, then we lose control. That is why I live in Salt Lake City. That is why I remain as the police chief here, because of the civil dialogue in nature that takes place. We support and welcome anyone who has criticism of the police department. If we've done wrong, that is my responsibility to make sure that we correct that. But that is not handled in the manner that we're seeing today.
Other than the emails and letters you're getting, are officers receiving any type of verbal abuse on the street?
Oh, absolutely. Verbal abuse on the street, verbal abuse at home, officers' addresses, phone numbers, and things are being put out. In fact, on the elevator ride down to this very conference, I encountered Officer Olsen, not the one involved in this particular circumstance, but the unfortunate one that's received all the hate mail and notices from everybody who thinks he's the one involved in this.
Chief, given the tenor of some of the emails that you received, are there going to be any precautions taken to ensure Officer Olsen's safety now that he's been identified?
Well, so interestingly enough, the identification of officers, I mean, the reason that we don't put forth officers' names is because we want to be able to conduct an investigation and have them be able to come and go and to not feel the pressure of that, right? Eventually, there's nothing to hide within the police department. I've got nothing to hide. I'm proud of this officer and what he's done in the past. We're going to review the circumstances. And so this is something that every officer lives with every single day. In fact, officers have been involved in some of the most horrendous crimes that have ever occurred in this state, and are asked to go to court almost every single day and stand up and testify to what they know to be true and correct, and put themselves in harm's way or additional harm's way that far exceeds what happens on the street on a daily basis. And so they're always aware of it. We're always concerned with that. But we should not, right? The partners that we have, the partnership and trust that we have developed should not erode to this over one single incident. It is very rare that we're involved in shooting situations at all, whether a dog or a human being. I think some credit needs to be given to these officers. I can look in my career on 13 separate occasions, I could have taken someone's life easily within the state law. I chose not to. I always credit training, the partners I was with, and my experience. That goes on every single day in this community, and officers demonstrate tremendous restraint and control. This officer, as described in his police report, faced a situation that he felt that was his only option. We're going to ask the questions. Well, what other options were available to you? What are the distance? We're going to get into all that great detail, but not appropriate to speculate at this point. Please, let me go back here.
In that vein, what can you give us about amplifying the situation of the child here and the service who the personnel rendered there?
What do you mean amplifying?
Well, any further development going on there? No.
As far as protocol?
Yeah, no, as far as service to the public and public safety.
Well, one of the things that I think is always the challenge in any organization, right? We have to take at face value what the public tells us. When Mrs. Jones dials the phone and says, There are gang members standing outside in front of my house, and I think they're dealing drugs. We don't have the ability to say, now, Mrs. Jones, I'm sure those are just nice people. Don't worry about it. Call us when something more dramatic happens. We respond to that. When a family calls and says our child has been missing and we're extremely concerned and these are the circumstances, what can you do to help us? Well, we respond and help, just as we do every single day in situations here. And officers have to take at face value and do all they can given those circumstances. And do we learn every single day? Absolutely. But we follow protocol. We have in place procedures. I cannot tell you the extensive amount of training that this department has received and the preparation that we've had because of past experiences regarding missing children. Most missing children who are ultimately killed are killed within the first half hour of their abduction. That shortens that time window for expediency for a police officer significantly. I won't name individual cases because I think most of you have worked those cases and heard about them in the past. Please.
Can you talk about the difference in protocol between when a human being is shot and when an animal is shot? When an investigation happens, when an officer is involved in that?
Well, there's not a tremendous amount of difference as far as internal affairs is involved. Internal affairs conducts an investigation. They interview the officers. We take photographs. We interview the witnesses. We basically put together a case file to determine what happened. My expectation of an internal affairs investigation is a fact-finding mission, independent of anything other than the facts. Their job is to determine this is what happened most accurately as they possibly can.
From what you know so far, do you think this was a credible threat? The dog maybe lunged at him? What can you tell me?
The only thing that I'm going to say on that right now is that you have, again, a very seasoned officer, not prone to panic, and the distances were extremely close in which that shooting took place.
Could he have used non-lethal force?
Well,
Taser?
there is a lot of could have used. Again, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, the same circumstance exists with a human being. In the distance that a human being is closing the space between an officer, what are your options available and how are you best going to take care of it? And so, absolutely, that's an expectation that will be reviewed, but irresponsible to speculate at this point.
Chief, a question.
Let me come here and I'll come over there, please.
Chief, there's obviously a lot of people calling that this officer be fired. Your reaction that he would lose his job or something like this? Or should lose his job according to all these people who believe that he should?
Let me address it this way. Every single year, there's many officers that are dismissed from the police department or asked to no longer work here because of circumstances that they're involved in. Most of those involve misconduct. And when misconduct rises to a certain level, they can no longer be a police officer in my eyes because they've lost the trust of the police department, myself, and the community that they serve. And so in this particular circumstance, the review will take place. If the officer acted appropriately under the policy and guidelines given the circumstance that existed, absolutely he should not lose his job. Why should he?
But the officer will remain on the job for the duration of this investigation.
Yes, as they do under many circumstances. Please.
Think of the video that came out yesterday from Sean Kendall, more informative or more insightful of anger?
I think my officers showed tremendous restraint.
You said that he'll remain on the job as he would in most cases, but in an incident where an officer discharges a firearm and a human being is killed, typically that officer is placed on administrative leave pending the results of that internal investigation. Is there a difference? Obviously, you said perspective's been lost. Is there a difference because it's the canine and not the human being?
Well, I think you need to ask yourself that question. Is there a difference? An officer utilized a firearm for an animal that he believed to be attacking him, is what the circumstances are. I think there's a different standard and should always be for an officer who takes the life of a human being. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not minimizing. Review should take place, but there is a different level. That is, in fact, a felony under our state law when you take a human being's life. And that's what the district attorney reviews, is did that officer violate state statute? I will take two more questions and then let me come up here and I'll come back to you.
How do you feel about how the dog owner has reacted overall? I understand there's a rally next weekend on this issue.
I'm not going to comment. I'm not in that person's mind. And certainly it is distressing. But the police department is always happy to work to improve what took place. In fact, representatives of the police department met with Mr. Kendall, and offered to do all we can. While that will never replace Geist, right? But to do what we can to make it right. It was never our intention to take the dog's life. And so we will continue to work towards that vein. All I ask, I'll tell you what, I am one of the biggest supporters of the ability in this nation to stand up and say the government is doing wrong and we have a problem with it. That should be done peacefully and with respect. And that's all I ask. And I welcome anybody. That's why we have that lovely plaza out front. If you have an issue with the police department, certainly come and bring it to us, and we will address it. And all I ask, again, was the examples I cited here, extremely, again, what I view as undeserving, unrealistic, and tragic. One more question here. Anyone? Did you have one? Or
Part of it be reassessing its the way it trains officers to deal with aggressive dogs.
Always. Always. I mean, after every single circumstance that we have, whether it rises to this level or not, the department reviews the circumstance of its police officers. Is this the right way to go? Is this how we should be conducting business? And can we do better? I mean, that's a constant thing that takes place. After every single SWAT operation that takes place, after every single critical incident, after every single major traffic accident that takes place in this city, a review is conducted in the police department about how we did business, what the circumstances were, and can we do better. Thank you very much.